Reading today comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 15th chapter. Listen to how God is speaking to us. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them in this parable, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that belongs to me.' So he divided the property between them, and a few days later the young son had gathered up all that he had, and he traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. And he would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and I will go to Father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put up his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us celebrate and eat, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And then they began to celebrate. For the son of mine is back, and the elder son had come. He was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard the music and the dancing. And he called to one of the slaves, and he asked what was going on. And he replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has gone and gotten him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. And his father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your commandment. And yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A law firm in California specializing in trusts and wills posts in an online article, "Pretty please, can I get my inheritance early?" There is no legal right on an early inheritance, they say, but with the right set of facts, we have helped many clients obtain an early inheritance. It can be done with a bit of finesse, they say. This demonstrates the scenario, setting today's passage, that this parable, this story, is applicable even today. So they go on to answer that question, how can I get my inheritance early this way? That depends on how nice you are to your parents. So looking at the Gospel of Luke, we see the similar provocative parable, and he's addressing the Pharisees. And at first glance, this story addresses the issues surrounding the sense of entitlement, inheritance, the workings within a family system, and how these impact the relationship of a father who had two sons. And most of you have probably heard this parable before. So as we dive into this fictional teaching told by Jesus, please stop, pause, and remember that parables are complex. They are rich for interpretation, and they are multifaceted in meaning. And today we are going to look at one way to view this parable. But note that in particular, Jesus uses a familiar formula in this parable. It starts off this way: there once was a man with two sons. Now, this formula is used throughout the biblical stories, and that introduction, especially to Hebrew people listening to the story, should pull upon the memory bank. Adam had two sons, Cain and Abel. That didn't go so well. And then we have Isaac with two sons, Esau and Jacob. And so there are a lot of these two-son stories. These are just a couple to name a few. And in these two-son stories, the format is followed, spoiler alert, that most of the stories in the Bible have the eldest son missing the mark, while the second son is the one whose action is to be emulated. But here, Jesus surprises the audience by presenting the younger son as reckless, while the eldest remains loyal. And we have come to know this younger son who goes to the father and negotiates an early distribution of the family assets to get a payout early. We know that he squanders his inheritance, and we've come to call him the prodigal son. And applied in this way, the word prodigal in the dictionary underscores the definition of being wasteful. The dictionary says spending money or resources freely, wastefully extravagant, is one way to understand prodigal. But did you know, I had to refresh myself, that the dictionary provides a second definition for the word prodigal, and it can be defined as having or given something on a lavish scale. In this case, the definition in the dictionary of prodigal is seen as generous, lavish, bountiful, abundant, or abounding. So the parable actually is a juxtaposition of both meanings of the definition of prodigal. We have a son living a lavish life marked with wasteful expenditures, self-indulgences, reckless with the inheritance. And then we have a generous father, abundantly offering him infinite love and grace. And then meanwhile, we have that older brother scoffing upon hearing of the homecoming. And I can imagine him as shaking his head in disgust at his father's reception for this wayward sibling. I imagine that elder son full of raging emotion, frustration, colliding with righteous indignation. I can't say the word today. How often are we like that older brother asking, what about the consequences? How can the bad choices be just so easily dismissed and the good behavior of another not go rewarded? Do you not see how hard I'm working? And I resonate with that older brother. How often do we secretly expect to be rewarded for our good deeds and doing the right thing? How often have you resonated with the older brother? All the while, if we resonate with that older brother, then we may miss, like he does, this important point. That younger brother in the story is left holding embarrassment, collapsed dreams, failed goals, shame, a bruised ego, and deep regret. And if a Polaroid was snapped to freeze frame that moment in this parable, I think we would see more clearly that Jesus presents the older brother as both consumed and blinded by his own self-pity. Unable to comprehend the depths of his younger brother's remorse, the older son offers no rejoicing at the homecoming hour, but rather groans, arguing a case benefiting his own self-interests. The truth is, in this parable, we have two brothers in trouble, not one. While the youngest grovels, the oldest begs, and both are making a scene, and the family reputation hangs in the balance. Thankfully, Jesus included in the story the Father who stands tall with the attributes of love and grace and determination. If we look at him, he never gives up searching the horizon in hopes that a long way off, he might see that lost child returning on the road home. Barbara Brown Taylor describes it this way: then his father does one of those things the patriarchs in the family do not do, runs. Runs so that everyone sees his pale ankles. Runs so that his robes get wedged up between his legs and flutters out behind him like an apron, she says. She goes on to say he runs like a girl, like a mother instead of a father. He runs and puts his arms around his son and kisses him right there on the road where everyone can see them. Reverend Shannon Kirshner at Fourth Presbyterian Church described it this way in a sermon: and as soon as the waiting father laid his eyes on the youngest son, even though the boy was still a long way off, he hiked up his robes and took off, running down the road to embrace his lost son now found. He smothered that boy with kisses and hugs, not even giving his son the time to say the practiced apology. It just does not seem to matter. Repentance does not seem to matter to this waiting, gracious, merciful father. He just wanted his child back home. Not only does the father shout to the rafters that his son has returned, but he also does the impossible. He rewards the son's irresponsibility by throwing a party and holding nothing back. God's grace, understood in this way, is expansive as it is unearned. It's already present, unwavering, regardless of our human decisions and behaviors. It is grace that runs and pants and propels towards us, meeting us where we are, as Landon often says, already, always loving us, even when our lives may have taken a different path than what we originally planned, even when life may have become messy and complicated and we feel imperfect, when we have experienced brokenness or disappointments in our lives. We come face to face in this parable that grace is given without limits, defying all that we thought we understood, expected, or deserved. Yeah, this parable's portrait of grace reveals that God's nature is one who sprints towards compassion and crawls towards judgment. And that stands in stark contrast to the world's ways of doing things. Similar to the older brother's inaction influenced by envy, resentment, jealousy, disappointment, and entitlement, that is the ways of the world. But the Father demonstrates the faithful pursuit of reconciliation as he begs the eldest son to come join the party, to turn up the music. But the dutiful older brother nurses resentment. Author Kristen Powers agrees, stating, perhaps the greatest surprise about grace is that while our practice of it benefits other people in communities, the greatest beneficiary will be us. She goes on to say, grace is first and foremost a matter of the heart. It's an orientation towards the world and other people that keeps us from going down the road of judgment and labeling it, which at the end harms us more than anybody else. So in many ways, this parable is multifaceted, with many ways to interpret it. But I think when we approach the parable in this way, there's a challenge to go soft on those we are ready to judge, to be attentive and ready to listen to the story of the wayward voice. We are given a permission slip to let go of our list of secret hurts, of our self-focused tendencies. For the good news in this parable is this, that God's favor extends to the just and the unjust. God, our divine parent, runs towards us with infinite love and grace at a fast pace so that we too might be inspired to sprint towards compassion, sharing that same surprising embrace of grace with others on the road of life. Though that no matter what you have done, that no matter what you have left undone, no matter what you will do, you absolutely can't change the claim of God's love and grace on your life. For nothing in life nor in death can separate us from the love of God, Scripture reminds. It does not matter if you are more like the prodigal child or that overlooked brother. God's grace persists for you and for me. It remains always ready to get the party started, to welcome the brokenhearted, the disappointed, and the weary, so that through being forgiven, may we also learn to forgive ourselves so we can forgive others. Because God first ran to us. That is the surprising embrace of grace. That's what this parable reminds us that we need to know. You are always already family, beloved. Don't you know it? Don't you know it, whispers the Father into the Son's ear? Nothing can change that. It is the early inheritance that keeps on giving. Thanks be to God.